The Ukrainian armed forces have started a 40-day timer for Russia, and this countdown is already effectively wearing down the enemy. The large-scale actions that Volodymyr Zelensky called forcing the Kremlin to peace are right now grinding Russian logistics to dust.
Our pressure plan is currently being met with great distress by the Russian leadership.
This strike is aimed at completely draining the enemy's military arteries. No spoilers, but the scale of the catastrophe for the occupiers is already evident.
Dear residents of Sevastopol, the situation with energy supply on the Crimean peninsula remains difficult. We are carrying out repair work.
So, what exactly is the classified tactic being implemented by the security service of Ukraine and the military within this 40-day strategy? How exactly are the defense forces cornering the Russian army, and where will the next flare-up occur? But most importantly, is this campaign capable of breaking Putin and forcing the dictator to surrender and look for a way out? I'll tell you all about this next. Don't switch channels. To understand why this operation is not just loud words for headlines, it's worth looking at the real background. What Volodymyr Zelensky officially approved on June 25th is not a fresh start from scratch. It is the legal formalization of a large-scale campaign that has been systematically turning the enemy's rear into ashes for several months now. Since March of this year, the defense forces have been methodically and mercilessly destroying Russia's oil refining infrastructure. Just in May alone, according to Bloomberg's calculations, Ukraine carried out a record 30 attacks on Russian oil refineries. Military analysts say that over the spring and the first month of summer, about 20% of all Russian oil refining capacity has been paralyzed. It might seem that a fifth is not half and not three-quarters, but the aggressor is already officially suffocating from a fuel crisis. The head of Rosneft even wrote a secret letter to Putin, which later leaked to the media, where he called the scale of the losses unprecedented. The Russian government, in a panic, began to implement plans for a complete ban on diesel exports, and huge lines formed at regional gas stations across Russia. But the strikes on fuel giants are far from the only thing happening. At the same time, a unique operation to isolate Crimea is gaining momentum unprecedented in its scale. And here the numbers are truly impressive. Back at the beginning of summer, Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov made it clear, in the near future, the peninsula will turn into an island. And this is not an exaggeration, but a statement of fact that we witness every day. If we break down the logistics that support the entire grouping of occupiers in the south, it relied on three main pillars. The first is the land corridor through the occupied territories of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, which the military has already dubbed the Road of Death. The second is the ferry crossings over the Kerch Strait. And the third is the railway of the Crimean Bridge. Today, the enemy's road supply has been cut by a staggering 75%, meaning that only a quarter of the previous volume now reaches the front line by truck. In a month and a half, from May to June, the armed forces of Ukraine struck at least 415 enemy trucks and destroyed 6 important bridges leading to the peninsula. The railway tracks are under constant fire control. Diesel locomotives are burning, wagons and traction substations are exploding. Ferries are also regularly hit by strikes. The consequences of this blockade are felt by the local population in their everyday lives. A severe fuel shortage has begun in Crimea. The occupation administration has imposed a limit of no more than 20 liters of gasoline per person, introduced ration cards and special QR codes. Major gas station networks such as TES and Atan have begun to close their stations en masse because there is critically nothing to refuel with. Reuters photographers have documented completely emptied gas stations in Yevpatoria. The situation has gotten so out of control that Kremlin spokesman Peskov was forced to make excuses at briefings and give empty promises, while collaborators Aksyonov and Razvozhayev personally reported to Putin about the fuel collapse. At the same time, a surprisingly apt post appeared in Russian patriotic social media groups. We have Orishnik, but there's no gasoline in Crimea. Ada, Zadi, Desigi, Udosyu. On top of everything, the occupiers shut down the operation of children's summer camps, and new bookings for tours to the peninsula have plummeted by a quarter. It got to the point where the occupation leadership declared a state of emergency in Crimea.
This regime is being implemented in order to regulate financial, monetary, credit, contractual, and other matters, as well as issues related to damage recovery. In other words, this process should also be simplified. Therefore, once again, I urge everyone to remain calm and trust only verified sources of information. Together, we will get through this. Thank you.
Meanwhile, the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet are already frantically working on emergency evacuation plans from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. And experts are confident that this is only the beginning of a major withdrawal. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense is commenting on these events with its signature dark humor. We are closing the beach season in Crimea. The forecast for tourists is unfavorable. And against the backdrop of this logistical hell for the enemy, Volodymyr Zelensky approves a 40-day strategy. What does this mean in practice? The official wording is described as an influence operation. However, the very next day, fighters from the SBU's special unit Alpha demonstrated the first telling results. Our drones successfully attacked the Zatoka shipyard in Kerch, striking two unique cable-laying ships of Project 15310, the Volga and the Vyatka, which Moscow had used for underwater espionage and mining the waters. Along with them, the giant cargo passenger ferry Petropavlovsk, which was already 96% complete, also caught fire. All three vessels were completely burned out. At the same time, strikes also targeted the air defense systems near the Kerch Strait, where a radar station and components of the S-400 surface-to-air missile system were destroyed. A little earlier, special forces attacked the military airfields of Saki and Hvardiske, disabling additional S-400 components and Pantsir S-1 air defense systems. The logic of the special services here is absolutely clear. Every destroyed enemy air defense system creates a gap in the sky and opens the way for subsequent strikes with even more precise weapons. The puzzle of the occupation is being assembled step by step, so in its essence, this campaign is neither a media stunt nor a psychological bluff. Judging by the initial results, this is a systematic dismantling of the main military hub of the Russian Federation.
Right now, our military
are taking out, both on temporarily occupied Ukrainian land and on Russian territory itself, everything that supports the Russian war effort, everything that makes this war and Russian aggression possible at all.
Now, let's move on to the main intrigue that concerns all analysts. Why exactly 40 days? Official Kyiv remains silent, but among experts there are three main theories. The first is purely pragmatic. 40 days is roughly until the end of July. It is during this period that diplomatic pressure on the Kremlin regarding real negotiations will reach its peak. Moreover, after the G7 summit, Donald Trump publicly endorsed Ukrainian long-range strikes deep into Russia and called for cutting off oxygen to the Russian energy sector. Military actions and diplomacy are perfectly synchronized here.
To the endless one. Our operation, particularly regarding Crimea, is thoroughly calculated, and the way the operation is progressing absolutely proves this. If Ukraine receives the support and resources that we have thoroughly discussed with our partners within the framework of the G7 nations, and this ultimately rests upon the decision of those partners, we will be able to swiftly establish the necessary conditions in which Russia will be forced to choose peace.
The second version is deeply symbolic. The number 40 holds a sacred meaning in history and culture. 40 years of wandering in the desert, 40 days of the Great Flood. It is possible that this is a deliberate hint to Moscow. You have exactly 40 days to make the only right decision before the system collapses completely. The third version is a flexible tactic. This time frame may be just the first stage of a bigger game, and afterwards the command will act according to the circumstances. Political scientist Volodymyr Fesenko notes, even in the best-case scenario, Putin will not capitulate exactly on the 40th day, as the dictator is panic-stricken about appearing weak in the media. However, the level of tension will rise exponentially. The Kremlin's reaction is already very telling. Russian Z channels literally exploded with bile over the phrase coercion to peace. This infuriated the occupiers the most, because it was precisely this term that Russia used to justify its invasion of Georgia in 2008. Now the boomerang of history has come back. An important nuance is also voiced by military analyst Serhiy Beskresnov, known as Flash. He soberly reminds us that Russia still has few resources. The Kremlin mobilizes thousands of people every month and churns out drones thanks to help from China. However, there is a factor that can break this machine much faster. That factor is the reaction of ordinary Russians. Previously, the so-called special military operation was just an abstract image on their television screens. Now it has come to their homes. The more frequently oil refineries near Moscow go up in flames, and the longer the lines at gas stations in Crimea, the faster the unspoken pact between Putin and his society will collapse. A pact based on the principle, we fight somewhere out there while you live in peace. According to the WSJ, the level of panic and anxiety among Russian citizens is now even higher than during the breakthrough in the Kursk region. And Ukraine is winning this psychological front very confidently.
Currently, there is a widespread fuel shortage, reported in as many as 60 different regions across Russia. There is also a sharp increase in gasoline and diesel prices, if they are available at all.
What are our partners saying? The reputable publication The Times, citing British intelligence, notes Ukraine is putting such powerful pressure on Crimea's transport and energy framework that Putin faces a dreadful choice: either accept Kiev's terms or go all in with total mobilization. At the same time, a fierce behind-the-scenes war is raging within the Kremlin elite. Some of the generals are begging for a freeze, while others are demanding a bloodbath. The dictator himself is now at a crossroads. So, the answer to whether our pressure is working is obvious. The Kremlin is already bursting at the seams. The only question is when the structure will finally collapse. Since the start of the full-scale war, the Crimean bridge has been out of operation for a total of more than 290 days. In May of this year, an absolute record was set. The bridge was closed for 13 days. In June, traffic was stopped 8 times in just the first 3 weeks. Air raid sirens in Sevastopol now sound almost every other day. These are not just dry statistics. This is immense psychological pressure that builds up every minute in the minds of people living in the occupied territories. Our drones have complete control over the road of death through Melitopol, up to 300 kilometers deep from the front line. Military analyst Taran described this situation very accurately. An army that cannot move safely in its own deep rear automatically loses the initiative and switches to a defensive posture even before the first shot is fired. And here, the psychological breakdown of the enemy is of key importance. Physical losses can be counted, but fear and demoralization cannot. But it is precisely these that win wars. So what conclusions do we have for today? First, the SBU Special Forces have already successfully taken out Russian ships in Kerch and destroyed advanced S-400 systems. And this is just the tip of the iceberg that has been allowed to be reported to the press. Secondly, Crimea is 3/4 blocked. Only the Crimean bridge remains, but right now the protective air defense dome around it is being systematically eliminated, preparing for the final act. Thirdly, the systemic crisis in southern Russia is no coincidence. Oil depots continue to burn, and courts in Moscow are overwhelmed with lawsuits over burned fuel. Fourthly, the level of social tension inside Russia is breaking historical records. And fifthly, most importantly, the 40-day timer has only just started counting down. The operation is in full swing. What surprises await the occupiers tomorrow is known only to a select few on Bankova Street. But one thing is clear, Russia definitely did not expect that the war they wanted to keep far away would so quickly end up right under their noses. Well, that's it. Our episode has come to an end. Give us a like if you found this analysis useful, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. See you next time.